Continuing with lifespan development, this is chapter 10. So we've talked about cognitive development. Now let's start looking at social development. So when we're studying attachment behavior, researchers, they're often divided along the lines of that nature versus nurture debate. And we've had those discussions already in class. Those who advocate the navitus or the innate, their position is going to cite more of John Bowlby's work in terms of social development. And pretty much Bowlby proposed that newborn infants are going to be biologically equipped with, verbal as well as nonverbal behaviors like crying, clinging, and smiling, and with following behaviors such as being able to crawl and walk after a caregiver. And that's going to elicit these instinctive type of nurturing responses from that caregiver. Now, Conrad Lorenz, his studies were of more about imprinting as well as attachment. And we talked about a little bit in chapter 9. So along with Harry Harlow, their experiment with contact comfort with rhesus monkeys, and you'll see that in your textbook, but it's helped to support that biological argument about attachment, okay? So attachment, noted as a strong emotional bond with special others that's going to endure over time. Infants can be raised in abusive or impersonal environments, and that'll cause social emotional type deficits, as well as deficits physically as well as mentally. What if a child doesn't form an attachment? Research has shown that infants raised in those impersonal surroundings, like an institution that really doesn't provide that kind of stimulation or love on a regular basis, by a caregiver, or they're in those under type of abusive conditions, they will have a number of different problems. These infants will seldom cry, they won't coo, or they won't even start that babbling. They'll actually become quite rigid, and they'll kind of when you're trying to pick them up, they'll stiffen up. So other issues is they'll have very few language skills. Additionally, they tend to form shallow or anxious relationships as they become older. Some appear more forlorn or withdrawn, as well as being uninterested within anybody taking care of them. Whereas others will seem insatiable in their need for affection, and they'll be like nonchalant. Finally, they're going to also tend to show intellectual, physical, as well as perceptual type of challenges that's going to increase their susceptibility toward infection, as well as what we call a neurotic type of rocking and isolated behaviors. There's been even some cases in which they died from a lack of attachment, believe it or not. Okay, so now let's look at some of the attachment styles. This slide is going to be talking about the strange situation. Mary Ainsworth and her colleagues, they had found significant differences within the typical levels of attachment that's going to be between infants and their caregivers or mothers, using a technique which is called that strange situation. Now, with this procedure, she was able to observe how infants responded to the presence or even the absence of their mother, as well as a stranger. Ainsworth was able to find that children could be divided into three types of groups, that being secure, anxious avoidant, or anxious ambivalent. Another psychologist, Mary Main, she added the fourth category, which would be disorganized or disoriented. Okay, now when we're talking about secure, about 60% within that study, when they were exposed to the stranger, the infant kind of seeks that closeness and contacts with the mother. They draw toward mommy. The first thing happens is where the use the mother as a safe base from which to explore. Second thing would be shows moderate distress or separation from the mother, and is kind of happy when the mom returns. Now, with the anxious ambivalent, 10% of the infants, they become real upset when the mother leaves the room. When she returns, the infant seeks close contact and then squirms angrily away to get away from them. The third one, which is anxious avoidant, that's about 15% of those infants. And the infants does not seek closeness or contact with the mother, treats the mother just like the stranger, and shows little emotion when the mom departs or returns. The disorganized, disoriented group, which was about 15%, here the infant showed a mixture of avoidant and ambivalent behaviors, kind of seeming either confused or apprehensive toward the presence of the mother. So remember, with the secure, they'll seek that closeness with mom. They'll be upset, but be happy to see them again once they return. The anxious, ambivalent, they was real upset when the mother left the room, and then they can kind of show some mixed feelings when the mom returns, like, oh, so you decide to come back anyway? With the anxious avoidant, they're the infants. They're not going to seek no closeness or contact. They'll treat the mom as if the mom was the stranger. And then the disorganized and disoriented, again, that's where they're more avoidant. They seem confused, as well as apprehensive in the presence of mom. All right, so now attachment and that power of the touch. Harry Harlow and his colleagues, they kind of investigated the variables that would affect attachment. And pretty much they created two types. First, they used a wide frame surrogate substitute for a mother for monkeys, the Reese monkeys. Okay, one would be covered with a towel, a terry cloth towel, and the other one was left uncovered. Now, the infant monkeys, they were fed by either the cloth or the wire mother, but they otherwise had access to both mothers. The study showed that the monkeys reared by a cloth mother clung frequently to that soft material of the surrogate mother and developed greater emotional type of security as well as curiosity than the monkeys that was assigned to the wire mom. There's been several different studies that would suggest that contact comfort between human infants and their mothers is similarly as important. So, for instance, touching and massaging premature infants kind of will produce significant physical and emotional benefits. Although there's going to be some research on attachment and contact comfort that's focused on mothers and infants, the more recent research has demonstrated that similar results will generally apply to fathers or other caregivers as well. Now, now, what is your romantic attachment style? According to the research, at least 55% of adults will agree with the first item, okay? At least 25% would choose number two. And then for the third item is going to be about 20%. So what I like for you to do is just take a moment, pause, read through each of these. I'll read the first one. But where do you see your attachment style falling into? Do you find yourself relatively easy to get close to others? Are you able to be comfortable depending on them or having them depend on you? Uh, that you don't worry about being abandoned or about anyone getting too close to you? And then go on, think about it, continue reading, and choose for yourself. We'll have a discussion hopefully in class about it. All right, so, excuse me. Let's talk about parenting styles, shall we? There's been studies done by Diana Baumrind uh, back in starting back in 1980 all the way up to 95. And she found pretty much that there's parenting styles that could be divided within three broad patterns, okay? That being permissive, authoritarian, or authoritative. Now, which could be identified by their degree of control and demandingness, as well as warmth and responsiveness. So when you're studying this for the exam, what I want you to do is take those last two terms, authoritarian and authoritative. They sound so alike, okay? One way to make it easier for you is to just remember to notice that there are two R's within authoritarian. And when you think of those two R's, think about rigid ruler, okay? Because with authoritarians, they're extremely punitive and they're rigid. They're the types that's going to be like, look, my way or the highway. I don't want to hear what you have to say. Children should be seen and not heard. Okay? That's pretty much what the authoritarian would be. Whereas authoritative, they're going to be more understanding. They're going to listen. They're going to be allowing the child to express themselves. They'll be able to provide instructions if a child makes an error or misbehaves. They're not going to just want to use corporal punishment, but they're going to actually try to work with the child. Okay? So understand then that there's going to be two T's in the term authoritative. And pretty much what you would think of there is tender teacher. So those are some acronyms that might be able to help you to recognize between the two. Authoritarians are the rigid rulers, whereas authoritatives, those parents are going to be tender teachers. Uh, Looking at the other styles though, you also have the permissive neglectful. Now here, parents, they're not going to make any demands. These are the ones that, they don't really care what their child do, long as, they're not in their way. Um, so it's where they would probably be rejecting, actively rejecting, showing very little support. Children with problems with this area, they tend to have poor social skills, little self-control. They'll be more risk takers, as well as being more oppositional, over demanding, as well as disobedient. Now, the permissive indulgent parent, they don't set too many limits. These are the parents that want to be your friend, so to speak. They'll be highly involved. They're going to be emotionally connected, but they'll still allow the child to do a lot of different things. They'll give them things that's going to hopefully pay them off to behave well. I love you. I care about you. You're free to do whatever you would like. Um, and I don't get me wrong. I love Will Smith. I love Jada Pinkett, but I find them to fall into the permissive indulgent categories because I felt their children got to do a little too much freedoms without any true guidance sometimes. If that helps you as far as understanding for an example. But these children, they're often going to they'll learn to respect others, and they'll tend to be impulsive though, and sometimes immature, and a lot of times out of control. So let's go back to the authoritarian one. Again, like I said, there's these parents are these are the hard, rigid rulers, and they're very they're lacking the warmth and responsiveness. They'll be ready to backhand a kid, and I don't care what you want. You're gonna do it my way, or it's the highway. Um, these children tend to grow up and they'll be easily upset. They're going to be irritable and moody. They'll become quite aggressive, and they also um, don't learn how to connect or communicate with others because they haven't been given the opportunities. Okay. Again, the last one, authoritative. This is the most popular area we would love parents to be in because parents are able to set limits and enforce the limits while also being supportive, highly involved, and showing love. These children are that grow up with that type of parent. They're going to be more self-reliant. They're going to have more control, eager to be high achievers, and overall just well adjusted. So now let's take a look at when we're talking about moral development. Heinz dilemma. Now, what I'd like for you to do, I'm going to have you pause the video, okay, and take a moment and read this uh, vignette that's on the slide, okay. And after you finish reading this, what I would like for you to do is just reflect on the questions that you see on the slide. Take a moment to write down just a brief answer that you would be willing to share here in class. I may make this the assignment, I may not, I might hold it for our classroom discussion. Um, but just think about, what are some of those differences and similarities that you see. Once you're finished, you can move on. All right, so what is the right answer to Hans' dilemma? What we're going to look at right now is Kohlberg stages of moral development. And what you notice on the slide is that there are three stages or levels within his theory. That being pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional levels. So Kohlberg, he wasn't just interested in whether participants would judge Hans to be right or wrong, but rather in the reasons that they gave for their decisions. So on the basis of the participants' responses, Kohlberg pretty much had proposed that there are three broad levels within the evolution of moral reasoning. And he composed of two distinct stages, and pretty much individuals at each stage and levels, they may or they may not support Hans' stealing of the drug. But their reasoning changes from level to level. Now, Kohlberg believed that, like Piaget's stages of cognitive development, his stages of moral development are universal as well as invariant. That is, they supposedly will exist in all cultures as well as everyone goes through each of the stages within a predictable fashion. So when you're looking at the pre-conventional stage, and I know that this here is real small with writing, but just know that stages 1 and 2 is looking at through birth, okay? It's going to be from birth through adolescence, in which the moral judgment is more self-centered. Uh, Again, child is going to be looking at how to react for themselves. Um, and you have what we call the punishment obedience orientation, where they're expecting the authority to be in control, and that they really don't have no way of making a decision without authority taken to heart. And then you have the instrumental exchange orientation, in which now children are going to be more, they're going to be aware of others. They're going to start looking at different perspectives, not just their own. And that it's really about reciprocating equal change between people, thinking about others. As we go into stages 3 and 4, this is that conventional level. You have the good child orientation, which, as I was growing up, I was always known as goody two shoes. Not, but that's what people thought of me, because more or less my moral concerns were that I was supposed to be nice, and I was supposed to get approval of everybody and think of others more than myself. And then there's stage 4, the law and order orientation, which you go by the rules, you live by the rules, and that's it. When we get to the post-conventional levels, now we're looking more at stages 5 and 6, and that's going to be during adulthood. that we'll look at the social context orientation. Now, this is where we appreciate the thoughts of others. We'll look at how life should be as morally in terms of the laws of the land as well as our own perceptions and experiences. The universal ethics orientation is going to be determined by what society thinks as a whole, and we make our decisions based on that. So there are criticisms, of course. In most theories everybody has, there's always going to be a criticism. And criticisms for Kohlberg's theory is that moral reasoning versus behavior are people who achieve higher states. This is on Kohlberg's scale. Is it really more moral than others, or do they just talk a good game? There are going to be studies that'll show a positive correlation between higher stages of reasoning and higher levels of moral behavior. But there's others who've kind of found that it's situational factors that's better predictors for moral behavior. Um, so one example would be research participants are going to be more likely to steal when told that the money comes from a large company rather than from individuals. And both men and women will tell more sexual lies during casual relationships than during close relationships. So there are cultural differences, and cross-cultural studies have been able to confirm that children from a variety of cultures, excuse me, generally will follow Kohlberg's model and progress sequentially from his first level, that pre-conventional, to the second, and then to the third of the conventional. And at the same time, studies are going to find differences among the different cultures. So one example would be that there's cross-cultural comparisons of responses to Hein's moral dilemma that will show that Europeans and Americans tend to consider whether they like or if they identify with the victim in questions of morality. Where in contrast, Hindu Indians, they'll consider social responsibility and personal concerns to be separate issues. Research has been able to suggest that the difference will reflect the Indians' broader sense of social responsibility. Now, possible gender bias. Researcher Carol Gilligan, she criticized Kohlberg's model because basically on his scale, women tend to be classified at a lower level of moral reasoning than men do. So Gilligan, she kind of suggested that, well, that's the difference occurred because Kohlberg's theory emphasizes values that's more often held by men, such as rationality and independence, while it's going to de-emphasize common female values such as concern for others and belonging. Now, most follow-up studies of Gilligan's theory, however, have found few, if any, gender differences in level or type of moral reasoning. So now we're going to take a look at personality. Just like Piaget and Kohlberg, Erik Erikson, he kind of developed the stage theory of development. And pretty much what he did was he identified 8 psychosocial stages of social development. And let me stop right here because the textbooks, they talk about 8 stages, but prior to Erikson's death, he actually was working on a ninth stage. And I'd like to make mention of that because within the 8 stages of development, pretty much Erikson talks about conflicts that we might have to go through. Like trust versus mistrust being the first one. But his last stage actually was more about wisdom versus transcendence. Now, we all hope to gain wisdom through our lifetime. And when he talked about transcendence, it's pretty much what we anticipate and expect and hope for in terms of when we leave this earth. Because let's face it, everybody, we're born, we live, we die. And Erikson, he had this belief that there's more to life and afterlife than anybody can actually discuss or declare. So what happened in the ninth stage is he couldn't finish it because basically he had transcended. His wife did attempt to do pick up where he left off, but she too passed on before finishing the work. So we work with 8 stages, but I did want you to know about the ninth stage. And more or less, again, understand that each of these stages, they're marked by psychosocial crises or conflicts that's related to specific developmental tasks. And basically, the names that are given to each stage, they'll reflect the specific crisis that's encountered during that stage. And at least two possible outcomes would occur. So, for an example, there might be a crisis or a task of most of the young adults like yourselves in terms of talking about intimacy versus isolation. Now, here, this age group's development task is talking about developing deep, meaningful relationships with others, okay? And so, those who don't meet this or become stuck in this particular stage, they risk social isolation. Erickson believed that the more successful we overcome each psychosocial crisis, the better chance we would have to develop into a healthy person, basically. So the psychosocial stages of the are the 8 developmental stages. They're each involving that crisis. And one thing you have to understand that Erickson felt that you must successfully resolve each stage um, in order to go to the next. Now, there are many psychologists that will agree with Erickson's general idea in terms of the psychosocial crises that helps with personality development. However, Erickson also has his criticisms. Like I told you, there's no theory that doesn't receive a critique. And in his case, Erickson's psychosocial stages are seen to be difficult to test scientifically. The second thing is that the labels that he used to help to describe these stages, they might not be entirely appropriate cross-culturally. An example of that would be in individualistic cultures, autonomy is highly preferable in terms to shame and doubt. But if we look at a collectivistic culture, now the preferred resolution may be more about dependence or emergent relations. So you can see how it's not exactly something that's truly diverse if you look at how various cultures would see these stages based on the meanings of the words. All right, so let's just take a quick look at those the first 4 stages, and then I'm going to stop here and we'll pick up with the next 4 stages in the next video. But the first one again I mentioned was trust versus mistrust, and this is around from birth to 12 months. Here, this is when an infant is going to begin to learn how to trust. They get that from their mom, they'll get that from their dad or caregivers, and it's coming through when they're fed, when they're changed, how they're held, the feelings of safety, love, affection, all this starts emanating here. So if a child, for example, it doesn't receive that support and affection, and then according to Erickson, then the conflict is that they don't learn to trust people, okay, because they didn't get that connection from in the first place. The next stage is called autonomy versus shame and doubt. And then this is occurring between the ages of 1 and 3. Now, the toddler, this is when they learn that word no. But toddlers, they'll start to, you know, find that independence, that autonomy. And pretty much caregivers are hopefully encouraging them to become more self-sufficient. They'll learn how to be more independent. Whereas if we over coddle a child or we won't allow a child to explore and learn on their own, they'll still be really dependent upon the caregiver to handle everything. Thus, when it's time for them to start doing things themselves, doubt starts to rise. Now, the third stage talks about initiative versus guilt. In this, ages 3 to 6. This is at the time when the children are entered school. They're learning how to initiate different activities. These activities hopefully will be building their levels of confidence, self-confidence, as well as being able to know and understand their part in social environments, how to be, how to act, when to speak, when not to speak. If they don't, they start to feel irresponsible. They might demonstrate anxiety as well as start feeling guilty if they're thinking about themselves and not others. They'll start to feel guilty about that process. Stage 4 is talking about industry versus inferiority. And this is occurring approximately between the ages of 6 to 12 when we're coming in toward adolescence. Now, elementary school age is pretty much that realm, and pretty much it's during this time they're learning more, they're becoming more productive, they're getting more life skills, training to learn how to become an adult eventually. Within this, if they're successful, they'll feel, their confidence is going to keep increasing. They're going to be proud about what they've done. Um, and the backside of it is if they don't feel this, then that sense of inferiority takes over where they don't think that they can do anything. And when they don't think that they can achieve, then of course production of learning new tasks goes down. So this is where I'm stopping at. We will pick it up again, of course, in the next video or during class discussion.